Hello, Americans, especially differentially if you are Native American. James Madison and the unknown founders behind him, which nature itself shows us all the Native Americans were. It was his plan that forced the Declaration of Independence, but other was his taught. It was his plan that forced the Constitutional Convention, and those founders, plural, and that still is replaced. They did not have free speech. They declassified why and how. They were tortured, extorted, in fact, human nature enslaved, therefore physically. What our founders declassified about this, even though it's, quote, known, quoting Donald Rumsfeld, as reported through CNN and Fox News. And I was next to the World Trade Center towers the morning of the attack and in the court next to it that morning. And it is discernible. That way it's recorded various ways. We could discern it. Former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, all sides of criminal and civil cases before the World Trade Center attack, and the interbranch and intelligence, foreign and domestic, and their campuses. They are shared at next to campuses directed to hide that. They're incapable at countries A through Z, individually grouped in together, per how they have been syntax systems, tactical ulterior, from the one that generates individual species bodies of individual bodies. So we could discern that it is not our species body, it is not the other species bodies that is generating those phenomena, the phenomenon of individual species bodies, made up of a whole bunch of individual bodies. And all group differences generated by nature's identity, its identity of relationship to itself. Also further positive here are our special difference as Earths, but distinctly as Earths. It is forced from here, as forced space nature transfer, as leash of Hades. Ancient pantheism was more probably about this science because nature itself shows us it is functional, how it is a distinct identity of hyper invisible but still discernible. And English is manifest. It was revealed to be taught this way, with the other languages relying upon the exceptions to be and to stay being, led by that which is hyper invisible but still discernible. And there are things that we all agree about, but they have not been connected upon because at the research locations and polling locations, they are recorded how they kept them criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw. Many tied to a Kevin Harris, who I never had a word of conversation with verbally. He's involved with multiple courts and other nations and proven child abusers, leaders of kids, and more then and now, and including his roles with abuses of a daughter and ways and abuse in the form of their roles with federal evidences, crimes of the FBI, courts, collusions at crime scenes since founding, pounding drums. James Madison and our founders, no one even allows people to be honest about the extortion of George Washington, and they get away with it, and they got away with it because of how the campuses stayed. Self-value use /s of those words that were forced by the breaching method. Before America's founders were born, there had even been roles with slavery only permitted. Otherwise, that body that was trying to counter such things only permitted was to hurt the difference of women, sickly, distinctly, but non-distinctly too, multi-front. So when everyone was adapting, knowing it was non-distinctly, they didn't realize the breaching method was locking them in, forced to blame other things, others, ourselves, and collusion /s, because the breach nature itself shows us, and our founders declassified this through their communications. See, but we have the names, the experts of the sciences. We'll say, oh, you don't know that? You don't know American history. Oh, you're delusional wrong. Oh, you know more than me. Yes. If someone's Native American, has black pupils, whites of eyes, little kids in New York City know more than the experts. See, we're playing these games. In the background, right through war, psychiatry had roles with criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions, raw premises treatments, reason treatments. They have the different cultures and different countries with members from that. They can't defend themselves. without affording to, without self-valuing offensive, identity theft, fraud, slanders against every difference /s, therefore every name. We have been systems totalitarian from the one generating individual species bodies of a whole bunch of individual bodies and all group differences. Otherwise, it demonstrates that we were using systems abridged from its own when we are using systems abridged from its own, or the moment we will be. And we're in a system that shows us, well, to me, to discern it, the moment we will be using abridged systems. But no one could appreciate the significance of this because abridged systems have only been allowed to be voiced, or that body was sensed. I recorded I'm not even a lawyer. I recorded organized crime methods, predicate acts methods next to the campuses with child abusers, years of kids, years apart, first floors. And then there rules in the difference of the adults or the kids and everything that comes before the courts. So lock a certain type of victim /hyper victim, where the breaching method uses the difference of the people attacking the courts attacking the people, the overt criminal enterprises, private ones, names on all sides of criminal and civil cases, the interbranch and porn. They already put the same self-valued sequence shifts, relative delusions. People too, in other words, we have black people's whites of eyes to discern the suits and ties, counters, exceptions. 3 branches of government never spoke for Native American, one of them properly. So there's necessary to understand why and how voting is given value it does not have. And the nature of debate contains quality aspects of nature wouldn't be able to be defended or wouldn't even be manifest had James Madison's plan been understood and the plural founders behind him. There are proofs it had to be Native American, maybe that even drafted, but we were directed to understand that it was James Madison's plan. He's the only founder we know the name of. And we were directed to understand why and how the other unknown founders, they did not have the security to live us to know their names. Because they were, not just because, but there were internationally monitored conversations to measure and maintain. Everyone having having been syntactical, therefore physical collusion /as against everyone else. And no complaints or that body was sensed or the difference generating it, including if that body was a majority of people, including if it was everyone from any modern country. This breaching method had already locked the names of the human species body, united, which our nature uses as a value, showing us simultaneously it values that way identity relationship to itself more one way, while simultaneously it devalues the independent part of a whole bunch of independent individual bodies. And it values the difference. 3 parts of itself are manifest, increasingly valued equally relative to any individual identity of value progression. Even art, even the smallest finding detail of art, has its volume signs, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously /hyper simultaneously, as the order of the finite, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously /hyper simultaneously, distinctly from how it is active and or grouped, and then further as the simultaneous and or progressive. One identity of forever nature is making more of its identity a volume through temporary /lasting space nature. And it is only further positive onto and as itself here, as every identity has relativity to positive and negative simultaneously. And or its difference as our own, as any difference, even if you make something up, its volume science /hypervolume science is inseparable from it. And English was revealed to teach this with other ancient languages too. For example, the parts of speech, they are about the invisible but still discernible /hyper invisible but still discernible, as that which is the body of what we are able to discern, with where and how we need to appreciate more than one word for a verb. And for example, why and how there are only two participle natures, the present participle and the past participle. And I'm referring to them as natures because every identity comes also with nature. Like, for example, the identity of a cell body, cell nucleus, cell wall, /S, and they're connected. And there's the body of the identity of the plant, for example, coming through that. But as it will not, but anyway. In other words, in appreciating gases in their mixture, and water into the plant. Like, for example, we could study under a microscope. Cell body, cell nucleus, cell wall, /S, and they're connected. And they're appreciating the gases in the water and the quality diffusion coming through it, with the quality diffusion of its identity itself, hyper invisible but still discernible. Identity is hyper invisible but still discernible. The past is gone, but it's only increasing value. Even seasons, even if they never get here again, they are the body of nature that is only increasingly valued. The body that binds them one. Well, not by any way. Whether we could discern, like for example, how we could discern, it is not our. There is an identity generating why and how there are totally different species bodies, but they are distinct, but they are also non-distinct, like two eyes. Even sharks have black pupils and whites of eyes, and they are simultaneous. They are distinct, non-distinct, simultaneous, but also there's a further distinct identity of simultaneous nature. Therefore, I'm referring to it as hyper invisible but still discernible. And this is before I ever heard of hypersonic weapons. Countries A through Z cannot speak about weapons or any subject for the names of the people of the sciences, for example, to use a phrase from the beginning of the Old Testament, to put it in the whole sentence. It says, at the beginning of the Old Testament, it says, only defend right here, where the names of the people of the sciences will come together in the part that comes before it. And that's before the part with Adam and Eve. See, people want to make fights about things that are debatable or appear to be debatable. And they're sequence shifting. Then, in other words, because what they're only doing is relative to where and how. Originally, still, we're supposed to address how, like, for example, why there's a witch trials place next to Webb House, now renamed the Webb Stevens Museum, which comes with hyper evidential. Also, that and how. Then and now, they still have other communicated than what our founders left for them to communicate for those founding locations and for themselves. Again, too, that and how and why. The only founder that we know the name of out of that group that was capable of counter-extorting key figures at key locations and forcing them to break the laws that would have them and everyone around them tortured, extorted, killed, and worse. But they had no choice because of James Madison's plan. We weren't supposed to be pretending that any side was other than a sick tool by a breach. Nature itself shows us what were all those crazy laws against women. They were against black people's whites of eyes, against Native, where they are all about equally. They're about a human fact human nature breaching method. They're about preventing free speech and making everyone pretend they have free speech anyway. They're about using truths for lies. They're about using truths to screen lies. They're about using fact human nature itself. In other words, when did they have the ability, in other words, the integrity to speak with passions for the law or calmness? The names of the people of the sciences properly. It would have brought up black people's whites of eyes. It would have brought up the extortion of George Washington. They don't even defend our founders, who had to put fake things about themselves in databases because they couldn't give up who they were. They would be sensed by layers of interests. There was even slavery rules. There were even slavery rules entrenched in northern colonies and southern colonies, more than 13, and then America's founders were born. No one had free speech. All of a sudden, everyone was being forced to become a unity and an independence, and layers of everyone and everything was not allowed to allow that. Not even allowed to sense it and not have telling on them. And who they would tell to was all, no one even is sensing the hyperforeign, the proverbial devil, the proverbial shaitan. It is more probable and is more practical to theorize, let alone to convict. The ancient pantheism was about many names that nature used and uses to show that and how and why it is functional, being hyper invisible but still discernible distinctly from how it is invisible but still discernible. And how if we name something, we're speaking about the invisible but still discernible. And it is all things, but it is them distinctly. It values being invisible but still discernible as the subject. Subjects we can only appreciate to finite, grouped, and simultaneous to an extent. But with that, we can discern the body of the hyper simultaneous, the same one generating the species bodies and our own. And we could ignore its system, but it demonstrates. But nature, this breaching method employed natures of industries and natures of styles, logic, certain type of victim / hyper victim / S, needing that the breaching method effectively uses that demonstrations of nature. It's demonstrating itself, uses those negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures to blame other things, others, or self for things that nature showing us. Appreciate how a human fact nature breaching method was and is one of those things that all those sick, multi-front, entrenched, only permitted roles with were about at the same time. Even though about a whole bunch of, well, that's a totally different subject. Native American is inseparable. That's the first from the breaching method. And roles that were with that breaching method against them, against Native Americans, the only thing that what motivated them to that, without using truths for lies, is what came from before religious messengers were born. Already, it did bad things to make the only people at locations, areas, and states everywhere the species body is. Those are the only people that could operate the phenomenon of the names of countries. So it did things to make those people blame other things, others, or ourselves for what a breaching method, a human fact, human nature breaching method insidiously did to the ancients. And then those people who had that done to them out of nowhere, but now on people they could discern doing it to them properly. They countered that properly, but improperly in the respect that now names A through Z didn't realize someone was making them appreciate use / S of names and differences A through Z, therefore names, tactical terrier from how nature, and then that's going to be defended because they did that. That's why we have, in other words, but more and more, these are names of the people that are sciences that can't afford to be heard, let alone to protract, even anyone. Can't even be honest about what a little kid is capable of discerning in New York City, the ones living in one of those huge buildings in the background in rap videos. The suburbs were designed reliant upon food resources from all over. This is a breaching method that had been sustained on countries A through Z. And everyone, in other words, since before Americans, that's why Native Americans were already fighting with Native Americans, and Native American founders were born. Already, everyone had roles with even slavery, northern colonies, the southern colonies, Not our founders had that entrenched. We don't have that understood, and people get away with debating it. The campuses are showing they need to value what it means to get over blaming on the people attacking it by pretending they speak for America. No one spoke for America. James Madison is the only founder we know the name of. You guys pretend that's debatable. The only way you could get away with debating that is self-valuing the quality aspects of nature, really how that I got there too. In other words, the books are criminally foreign influence, tactical delusions, raw. See the book, school book depository associated with the syntax and the nature /s note regarding people, regarding in the news, the people, no matter what difference they are, regarding the assassination of President / Chief Kennedy. The Constitution unabridged stands for everyone, especially differentially, but especially, in other words, the Native Americans. This is a Native American system, regardless of the Native Americans' opinion. Most Native Americans in all humanity agree that we don't hunger and thirst, so we could be living in these contexts that were designed by a torture, extortion, factory nature, slavery method. Nature communicates with positive and negative, value nature, progressions, acts of nature. For example, there are U/S. When you hear hunter-gatherer, self-valued use of that is also used to sense for the breaching method. Other things, others, ourselves, self-valued being haven't been blamed. Then what our founders declassified for us to blame on the breaching method too. And nature at the same time, but it's still replaced. That's hyper-evidential proofs too. All these things can be used to make hyper-positives out of nowhere. And we can make a hyper-tribe. But that's about the hyper-invisible but still discernible. So what we have to do is make a hybrid tribe too. Tribe/S. There should be a hybrid tribe of all the different Native Americans, individually grouped and together. Nature wants those different because with the breaching method employed use /S, but everything the breaching method employed does it through our own. We have to pay attention to where and how it had and has roles with subject treatments and appreciation of syntax and books, pretended science, leaving out what our founders declassify for like the guide to reading the words of history. Replaced. Same thing with the Old Testament and then the Quran. Both of those books have keys up front. The Quran has a part that says all that matters is if someone's going to be honest about their use of the name for that identity that is hyper invisible but still discernible. In the beginning, I'm translating and from an English translation. In the beginning of the Old Testament, in English translation, it says, only defend right here, where the names of the people of sciences will come together in the part that comes before it. See, there's relative to this. Because nature is itself as a unity, in other words, as a singular identity of value progression, like your body is. A whole bunch of different identity of value progressions, but as one identity of value progression. It shows us this about ourselves because everything is itself. And further, its system here are our special differences as Earth's difference. The only reason why it lasted so long is because we are only one species. The entire ocean, they have mercury in it now. God knows what else. It was reported there's nuclear things in the water, long-lived isotonic particles, nuclear affected, something like that, shrimp. Everyone speaks about things like food, water, and jobs. And there are self-value defenses of that. You can't defend that and afford what our founders communicated about this. And in other words, You guys, all I have to do is follow mandated law too, because the World Trade Center, certain type of victim slash hyper victim, victim predator, hyper predator, like they're lawyers, pretending that it's legitimate to have them speak as one. Well, they have collusions with Wethersfield police to fake conversations with me as a kid and as an adult, and with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin. With Saudis, they're forcing the collusions with them, but other countries too force that. These are people just putting fake transcripts in databases, including fake phone transcripts and the equivalent. Fake transcripts interbranch in our campuses filmed 24/7. They just put a fake transcript narrative and show that, pretend that's intelligence. In other words, and their roles are next to body double spots, even if they were made up, with the people involved with the World Trade Center attack in other countries. CBS, too, to hide that after the World Trade Center attack, which also revealed their collusion before and after it, inter and intra-city since I was a kid. And they hid the collusions ongoing with that when they had the sale of CBS. They weren't supposed to do that. In other words, increasingly, Whiting Forensics has a bunch of people involved with a police chief, Cintron, and his family members are recorded, confessed, demonstrate, confirmed. They're involved with Elm Street's people with the corners of Elm Street and Rocky Hill and Wethersfield, who are also next to religious spots, involved with all kinds of differences, rackets, identity theft, fraud, slander, sequence shifts, federal evidence planting, federal evidence crimes to the news too. Have roles with proven child abusers, leaders of kids, with the families involved with them with that through time. Prepare. It's human mind. Vaccines. So this is interstates, this is Connecticut. And then they pretend it's personal dishonesty. In other words, they're lying about their motivation. They have to screen their motivations because the other countries are involved with them. A bunch of people named Scalora and tied to a Claudius Scalora have had collusion /S too, with WFSB, with the intelligence next to them. They have collusion with the differences of guilt. The breaching method had showed them they need to hide, and they hid that by roles with predicate acts with fax methods recorded. See, this breaching method keeps the names of the people, the sciences, self-value collusion /S, with replacing what our founders and what nature itself at the same time communicated for us, and pretending other. Worse than criminal incompetence spoke for a reason. Worse than criminal incompetence. Where James Madison's plan is the only correct answer for what caused the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitutional Convention, even the Civil War after him. James Madison's plan caused all that. Why and how? James Madison, once he was a president /chief, he still didn't have free speech. They declassified this. We're supposed to understand this. We're supposed to defend our founders, not frame them for what other people caused and only permitted collusion /S with, like slavery, and through other countries, but for worse. And then any voicing of a voice from any grouping of countries, as long as you're entertaining locations, areas, and states as is, logic, principle treatment, can't defend themselves from the breaching method either. You use their voices remotely too. Use how no one fathomed. Its use of location /S. Interbranch forging and switching names was his intercampuses, including medical campuses and fire campuses, and the differences of guilt of the names there, next to it, or conjunctive to it, and to that difference was used with where estimations with subject treatments and with people's appreciative. They're changing and faking the value of what is actually typed. Whiting Forensics increasingly too has people involved with this and with their narratives regarding a dossier, and they have a dozer, someone that with that spelling of that name, involved increasingly with a Perone family and with a Kerr family, with sexual medical offenders of kids at Hartford Hospital and next to Fox Connecticut News, and at religious spots in their corners of street. People associated with a Perone family and corners of streets associated with them are manifest where the breaching method has use slash s of corner of the streets where it keeps other things, others ourselves, blamed for nature's demonstrations of itself, where it's a part of the subjects, black pupils. We don't believe how we have black pupils, whites of eyes. Oh, guys, who disbelieves. Get me off the fake conversations with WFSB, please. And the interbranch at the same time. Get them on paper, one name in sequence. They're refusing to identify themselves legitimately. They've been sticking fake transcripts in the courts before and after the World Trade Center attack, as ones on all sides of criminal and civil cases, depositions, interstates, and also involve inter and intra campuses with predicate acts with facts methods with the predicate acts with fact method /s. This breaching method hides itself through the plural parts, even if it's no longer standing. And there are proofs. That is, in other words, we could all, countries A through Z could get benefits by naming the hyperforeign, and will help them lead their syntax and explain properly, know how to fathom how to do it properly. From off campuses, how hyper additionally, time collusion /s there, where are showing he needs to hide it there, but also at other locations /s, and that's hyper additionally with a collusion /s at all locations that nobody wanted, but everyone had to and has to keep going, ignoring a whole bunch of things, pretending other with subject treatment. How it's gotten away with, you guys were child abused. Those of you who went to the best campuses and the worst campuses, the difference between that, the breaching method needs that exploited too. Non-distinctly, how everyone's hurt by every kid. The best campus and worst campuses, worse than criminally foreign influence, tactical delusions, raw weapons against themselves. Even if they make them rich, they're students. In other words, the difference even is exploited. Because non-distinctly, that's still why and how we have not addressed how non-distinctly there was a breaching method that only allowed even roles with crazy things like slavery, northern colonies and southern colonies, and then America's founders were born. That's not known because they what everyone had before us, pretend. They're pretending it's real and debatable. Then say, oh, you delusions, you don't agree with the expert. In other words, we're right through world wars. Germany, Russia, interreligious nutbags. They've been collusion /s. Then they're going to pretend it's hate speech. They know they have Jewish people that I didn't respond to them when they were trying to make me get hate speech, like my algebra teacher too. How she offensively made sexual confessions repeated to get me a response. I didn't respond. Her roles with a family near me that's Jewish, involved with multiple intelligence families too, with Washington, D.C., and next to the networks, involved with sexual medical offenders with a domain family, who was one of the people who was in the class, and Anthony Yagman. Further, with some Mendez police that fake conversation with me at the police station. And as a kid, with people as a kid, and as an adult, increasingly they have collusion /s with intelligence families on my street and ones that used to live in my area who put fake things in databases. And they have multiple police departments involved with them with organized crime acts here, and roles with the news and the names next to it, and the difference of guilt here or there or conjunctive to it, like WFSB with the fake conversations with me, and about the World Trade Center attack. In other words, you guys search what is not debatable. And get me off fake conversation within the branch and stop hiding that evidences. That evidence that shows a whole bunch of evidences is generating them, not just to me.